Climify is independent of climate designers. The views expressed on Climify are solely those of the host, Eric Benson, and guests of each episode, and do not represent the views of the climate designers. Let's be real. The status quo has created a lot of the world's problems, and we can't rely on business as usual to get us out of this mess we're in. That's why we're partnering with Think NATO this season. It's a dead simple 4-step process to blow open conventional thinking and get to truly unique and innovative ideas. It's not about finding the perfect answer. It's about starting with the right questions, pushing the edges, and then taking action. You can learn more about Think NATO at thinknato.com. That's ThinkNADO.com. Think NATO, the positive action engine. Hey, it's Eric. Welcome to a very special episode of Climify. In this crossover episode, we are introducing you to a wonderful podcast called the Hey Change Podcast. It's a show where we grapple with the wisdom of uncertainty and choose inner development as a tool for radical change. And guess who hosts the show? Let's time travel back just a few weeks to the first episode of our season 5, Anne Therese Gennari. We told you she was awesome. The episode we have for you today is her interview with Charlie Sellars. It's the first episode of season 5 of the Hey Change podcast. Do you see the symmetry there? Anne was the first episode of our season 5. All right, okay. It's just a coincidence about the season 5 stuff. But anyway, the truly cool part is how seamlessly her episode of her podcast fits in with our season on climate optimism. Her guest, Charlie Sellars, is an inspirational climate optimist himself. He has a brand new book entitled What We Can Do, a climate optimist guide to sustainable living. Charlie is a director of sustainability at Microsoft, which has pledged to become a carbon negative, water positive, zero waste, and of course, protect our ecosystems by the year 2030. As one of the youngest directors at the company, Charlie has overseen sustainability for both the Windows and cloud operations portions of Microsoft, helping to launch several sustainability forward products ranging from new Windows PCs with repairable and recycled components to the ocean plastic mouse. You can learn more about Charlie at charliesellars.com. So Charlie and Anne are an incredible combo in this Hey Change podcast episode, providing the fuel we all need to remain active and positive as we take on the climate crisis. I absolutely know you'll enjoy this episode, and I suggest you check out Anne's podcast at heychangepodcast.com. Follow and subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts.
You have a pretty interesting introduction to this world of sustainability. And I think maybe one that, as someone who works as a director of sustainability at a company like Microsoft, I don't think people would assume that that's how you went about it. So do you want to give us just a little bit of introduction to how did you end up doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's funny because I have no background in sustainability, and yet here I am. As you mentioned, I'm a director of sustainability at Microsoft, focused on how do we build cloud architecture and cloud data centers in a way that is less impactful on the planet. But I graduated with an undergraduate degree. I have a Bachelor of Arts, I should say, in physics. And you're like, how do you get a Bachelor of Arts in physics? It's like, well, you study physics at a liberal arts school. And that's cool and that's great. But I didn't take any environmental studies or sustainability classes when I was there. It was always a passion, but I didn't really see a pathway to make it real for me until further in my career. At one point, I was handed an events portfolio. I was effectively a glorified events manager in my prior role. And that was my first little aha. And I was like, wait a second. Nobody is really doing sustainability at large here, but why not? Why we could? Why don't I? And so I was given this events portfolio, and I was very unabashed and shameless in making sure that every event we did had a little bit of sustainability content here, there, and everywhere. And over the course of 3 years of running that events portfolio, I was able to kind of use that as a launch pad to build sustainability as part of my professional and personal brand. And I just got very lucky that one of my clients said, "Hey, I like what you're doing. Do you want to come start my sustainability team here at Microsoft?" So I went from a background that had nothing to do with sustainability to a job where I kind of made it my job to be sustainable. And then that very fortunately translated into actually having a job where I'm full-time working on sustainability, and I have been for almost 5 years now.
Wait, so you started the sustainability team at Microsoft?
I started the devices sustainability team at Microsoft. So
Oh,
for the listeners, here's what's very cool about working at a large corporation like Microsoft. There's probably 1,000 people working on sustainability, either formally or informally at the company. And so you'll have like a big corporate sustainability team. I did not start that. That existed before me. But you had every kind of part of Microsoft, every business within Microsoft might need its own sustainability team. So when I was brought in to build out the sustainability office for the devices group, it was to say like, hey, for like Xbox and for Surface laptops and for the Windows operating system, for mice, for keyboards, what does it mean to be sustainable? And that was the question that I had to kind of go and charter and then actually make it real throughout our supply chain, through our product design, and through our operating system, which which was a fun challenge.
well, first of all, I just love your attitude of why not? And I think we need to embrace you just embrace that attitude more in everything that we do, especially in the world of sustainability and climate change. But I also love something that you said to me in the past, which is you believe every job is a climate job, or at least that every job could be a climate job. And I don't think we're used to like hearing it that way. And I think also many listeners might be thinking, I want to work with something that has to do with climate, or I want to bring value in this movement, but I don't come from that background. I don't have this degree. I don't have the knowledge. And technically, what you're saying and what I firmly believe in too is that every job could be a climate job. But do you want to talk a little bit about what you mean by that and why do you believe in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where we originally got connected on the notion of climate optimism. And, you and I have taken kind of a different view of the same overall principle. And a lot of my climate optimism in my book and in my life is all about that notion that anything we can do can be a sustainability action. And that certainly extends to careers. And I kind of feel like I lived that in a lot of ways, where I had a job where I was in charge of putting on events. And I said, hey, wait a second, I have this platform I've been given. No one's telling me I can't. So until someone tells me I can't, I'm going to start making this focus on sustainability. And then here's the spoiler: it actually ended up being valuable for the company. So they let me keep doing it and even encouraged it along the line. And I think also, my job at Microsoft, so many of the people who are actually doing quote unquote the sustainability work are really good at something else. They're really good marketers, they're really good product developers, software developers, engineers, supplier negotiators, purchasers. These are all people who are effectively really good at one thing, and then have been challenged with the gentle question of, what would it mean if you were to make what you do a little bit more sustainable? And then that becomes that aha, where someone who's been a dyed-in-the-wool supply chain logistics expert for her entire career suddenly is like, wait a second, I actually do have a lot of knowledge of how to make my job more efficient, more sustainable. And I think what's so exciting about that notion is that I have the benefit of being a rare guy with a sustainability job in his title. But that's what everybody looks at. So when I open up a new role at Microsoft, I have hundreds of applicants coming in the first, I don't know, 2 hours, because they just look for the word sustainability and then everyone gravitates towards that. But there's this huge sphere of other jobs that actually go and make it real that people are missing because they're not conceiving of them as sustainability jobs. And I'm going to give you one quick, fun little story I had with a person who asked me for career advice, Anne Therese. It was very funny. She comes to me and she's a product owner at Microsoft. She's a software developer and she's building this product. And she said, Charlie, I want a job in sustainability. And so I said, okay, well, what do you do? She's like, oh, I'm a product owner and I own this one product and this software, and I'm pretty much in charge of every decision we make for it. I'm like, okay, awesome. So what kind of decisions can you make? She's like, well, we can think about the architecture of the software to make it way more efficient and to use way less resources. And I can design it in a way that invites the users of the product to, use it more efficiently and more sustainably. And I was like, it sounds like you already have a sustainability job. Why are you asking me for a job? She's like, I have a sustainability job. Like everything you just described is way more real than most people who actually have sustainability jobs. You have like power and
Mm.
control to make these changes, and you just haven't given yourself permission to recognize that in yourself yet. And hopefully I let her take that permission after that conversation.
Wow, that's powerful. And it reminds me of something that I talk a lot about, which is, well, my work is very centered around narrative shifts, right? Like my
Hmm.
mission at the Climate Optimist is shift the narrative. And there are different ways
Hmm.
of doing that. And one is this whole notion of, minimizing ourselves and our footprint to maximizing our footprint. And once you do, even just like saying the word, I want to maximize myself. Like, what does it mean for me to maximize my gifts, my talents, my skills, my
Yeah.
passions? And when you do, you recognize that, wow, there's so much I can bring forth into this movement and I have so much to contribute. And this whole idea that we need to minimize ourselves is so diminishing and, very disempowering. And what you're talking about is that we have already developed and honed in on these skills that we hopefully are driven by and something that we're good at. And in order, like for us to contribute to this climate movement or whatever you want to call it, find a hard time, picking a word for it, but building this new world, it's just
Yeah.
about recognizing like, what am I good at? What gets me excited? What gets me going? And how can I somehow use those skills to contribute, right? And so most likely because everything in this world has to be reimagined. We have to
Right.
really flip every rock and every stone and discover every pathway forward. And because of it, everything is a climate job. I
Oh
actually
yeah.
want to quickly mention another story. Since we're talking stories, I have an amazing friend and colleague in New York City. She's also a TV host, and she speaks a lot about sustainability. And we once mapped out this workshop, which we called Counts in Climate. And
Hmm.
we based it on this idea that, yes, everything counts in climate. Every job counts in climate, every thought, every vision, every little nugget, every question. We have to find the courage to explore everything there is. And so, when you look at it that way, this sort of like seemingly insurmountable, unapproachable goal, which is creating a better world, seems
Hmm.
more approachable. It seems more near to us because let's start where we are. Let's start like,
Yeah.
let's flip the rock that I'm having right in front of me. And how can I make this better? How can I improve my product? How can I talk to my team and my company? Like, what can we do? And so thank you for, I guess, teaching that to people or even just like giving free advice. And you should probably start charging people for like life-changing advice. But yeah, I think you're so on point.
Well, that was probably one of my favorite parts of your book was this notion of flipping from minimizing footprint to maximizing footprint. And I mean, I kind of lived that reality at my job. And I was realizing when I came into the devices team, and I want to give a lot of credit to the people that were already there. They were doing a lot of good work, but there were some people who were really focused on trying to change the company by the minimization rather than the maximization.
Mm.
So the minimization almost felt like, oh, we have to do all of these things. And if we don't do all of these things, then it's as good as doing none of these things because we have to minimize, minimize, minimize. Um, that's hard to get people jazzed about, Like if I'm designing a product and I've got a million things to worry about, like does it work? Can I sell it? Yeah, is it accessible? And there's like these other trade-offs. Being told like, hey, you have to do all these things or I'm going to be mad at you is kind of like not a great way to get people like super excited. So instead of like minimizing kind of the negative effects of the products, if you will, that was one of the big things that we started to do a bit of a culture shift around was can we maximize the sustainability opportunity with the product. And
Mm.
that was such a fun one. And like, for example, one of my favorite products that I was involved in early on is this little ocean plastic mouse. And unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't sell mice anymore. Otherwise, I'd tell everyone to go buy one. It's super cute. It's literally a mouse that we made out of plastic that we dredged out of the Pacific Ocean. Like, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's like, hey, we just kind of had this interesting question of like, this is a very hard technical challenge to take all this really dirty plastic and turn it into something. But like, what is the art of the possible? What can we do here? What is the kind of the fun opportunity in front of us to try to do something really interesting? And it was really hard because you get this plastic, it's so dirty, you can't get a consistent color when you regrade it. But then our industrial designers were like, hey, why fight that? let's make it speckly. Let's make it kind of beautifully imperfect.
Mm.
And it became this really fun challenge, sustainability became fun because everyone who was involved, none of them for the most part being sustainability people, mind you, were all like, oh, I want to see if I can do this and this. And oh, what if we did this with the packaging and we get all the plastic out of the packaging? And yeah, it was a big hit. I think it was one of our fastest selling mice of all time. And it was because we kind of decided to try to maximize what we could think about rather than, the alternate approach of like, oh, if we're going to design a mouse, well, we can't do this. We can't do this. We can't do this. We can't do this. And now, granted, you got to do a little bit of both. You got to do a little bit of both pragmatically. But I love, this mentality of maximizing the opportunity because that's what resonates with people a lot more than maybe sometimes the fear-based approach, which might not be concordant with how people can live their lives or are at least conceive that they can live their lives, at least not yet.
Well, first of all, I think you just named the episode, The Art of the Possible. I love that. And I think something we should just keep in mind a lot during our lives and when we go about our daily tasks. And, you're speaking to so much right now, and let's not dive too deep into the neuroscience behind it, but there's so much to be said about optimism. And when we allow ourselves to get excited, because when we do, we open up this gateway to our brains that we don't have access to if we feel minimized or threatened into, or like we have to cut down, or it's just like not a very inspiring way of going about anything, and especially in a workforce, like it's not fun. Like, who wants to show up to the table and like, let's cut this in half or whatever you want to, the wording you're using. But I think another thing too that comes to mind as you're talking is like, I don't know how to phrase this, but sustainability almost has to become second nature,
Yeah.
where like, of course it's sustainable. We still have to strive to make the best possible product, right? We can't sacrifice on the expense of sustainability. And I think that's where sort of to date, we have a little bit failed in our movement, where we're expecting the consumer to quote unquote somehow sacrifice or go the extra mile or pay a bit more money or whatever it is. It's like, no, we have to make a really effing good product. And then it just has to be sustainable. I don't know what kind of narrative shifts or what needs to happen for that to be the status quo. But I feel like you're onto something at Microsoft. And I love that we have a, a very spirited guy like yourself kind of spearheading this movement. But I'm also curious to learn, when you're working with different teams and different people, maybe some of them are passionate sustainabilitists. I don't even know if that's the word. People working in sustainability, and other ones not so much. But what is the overall like feedback? Are people excited about it? Is there still a lot of pushback to change? Like, how much is set in the old ways of doing things? Do you feel like there is a little bit of like possibility to nudge, I guess, in the right direction, or do you come across a lot of pushback still?
Yeah, and I'll extend this beyond Microsoft. I think I'll extend this to just generally how I kind of see things is you've got a lot of true believers out there for sure. The majority, even though it might not feel like it, the majority of Americans and the majority of people in the world do believe that climate change is a real thing. And you have a lot of those folks who are legitimately worried about it and want to do something. So, it's very rare that you're getting someone who's like, I'm going to explicitly not do this thing just to spite you because I don't believe you at all. It does happen, but it's very, very rare comparatively. But you do sometimes have to think about what is the language you're using to activate somebody's interest. And I'll give a great example of this. Is I got a haircut the other day. And the barber was a pretty kind of dyed-in-the-wool, right-wing kind of enthusiastic guy. And he was talking to me about a lot of things. And I kind of had this moment of like, I wonder what language would get him excited about the things that I am excited about as a sustainability person. And so we got talking about, our homes and our homesteads. And he's like, yeah, I just think it's crazy that the government would prevent me from collecting my own rainwater. And I heard that, and I was like, oh, here's the end. Here's the end. I was like, well, yeah, no, that is crazy. We should be a lot more have a lot more ability to be autonomous in our own homes. Like, we should be able to collect our rainwater as long as we do it responsibly. We should be able to generate our own power too. He's like, yeah, we should be able to generate our own power. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, I don't know, I'm getting some solar panels. It's great for that. He's like, oh, maybe I should get some. And I'm laughing the whole time because, you've got someone who you might paint initially as being like, oh, he's not going to be interested in these sustainability things. But sometimes it's just about the language you use. Sometimes it's about the framing that you use. And it's thinking about, everyone wants an invitation to the table. They might not realize it. And what is the right language for that invitation to get them to open that letter and say, okay, you know what? I want to dance with you. I want to play ball with you. It doesn't always work. They got a lot of competing priorities sometimes, but we can't just preemptively write folks off as like enemies or write folks off as not being interested in the cause just because we've been using the same language that works for maybe our group of folks that it just is not going to resonate with those group of folks.
Right. And kudos to you for actually sparking this conversation, because I teach about it when I do workshops of like, here are some tips for starting a climate conversation, especially with someone who doesn't quite agree with you. And
Mm-hmm.
you're hitting the nail where you want to, invite with questions and try to figure out like, what's our common ground here? What do we both care about? And actually approach the topic without even approaching the topic. Like, you try not to mention climate change, sustainability, or whatever. Like, try to figure out like, what do you care about, and how can you then make that about this. So good job. I'm really proud of you. And the haircut looks amazing too. So
Thank you.
2 wins in one. And I think we're tapping into what we really should be talking about, which is your book, and the fact that we connected on LinkedIn because you had announced that you were writing a book on climate optimism, and someone tagged me and said, you need to talk to this guy, because obviously I have a book called The Climate Optimist Handbook. And we had a call last summer and connected instantly over many different things. And I'm so happy that we're back on the podcast. But let's just throw the question out there. Why did you decide to write a book on climate optimism? And I know we have a different approach to it, although a lot of it is, similar. But what's your book about? Why should we read it? And why do you think climate optimism is so important in today's world?
Oh God, there's a million reasons for that. And they're all pragmatic ones, Anne Therese. It's not purely just this pie in the sky thinking. There really is a lot of really good pragmatic reasons to be a climate optimist. And I think there's a lot of ways to kind of focus on what does that mean and how do you activate people on that topic. I think you've written a really good book that talks more about the how do you go on your own optimist journey, I think is a decent way, hopefully a decent way to kind of high level for your book. There are other books that are about like here's all this other good stuff happening in the world that should make you optimistic. Like, oh look, we're actually reforesting this one forest over here. My book is a little bit more on the kind of like the what can I personally do with the activities in the world that are either more or less sustainable, and giving people more of a kind of a pragmatic guide so they feel empowered rather than powerless to make a difference in the everyday personal, professional, and political decisions that they make. So as to the why I wrote the book, entries, it's a combination of two things, maybe three. The first is it was COVID and I was really bored.
Great,
I was just
great reason.
I was just sitting on my couch playing Halo, and I'm like, man, I gotta stop. I gotta do something better with my time. Although Halo is great, I do love it. The second was, because I am fortunate to have a job with sustainability in the title, I have a lot of people reaching out for career advice. I probably talk to one person a week on average, and I have for almost 5 years now, for folks being like, Charlie, what do I do to get a job in sustainability? How do I become more sustainable? And I really realized that across all those conversations, the same themes were popping up. And a lot of the same themes were either I'm not giving myself permission to be involved in sustainability and I don't know it yet, or I just don't know what sustainability is. I love the concept, but I just don't know what I'm supposed to do. And these are allies. These are folks who really could make a huge difference that just didn't feel empowered to do so. And that's kind of why I wrote that book. And then the third, of course, is just I'm passionate about believing that optimism is pragmatically the best solution forward. And I say this in the intro of my book. It's called What We Can Do. I'm sure there'll be a link to it after the podcast. But when it comes to the planet completely disengaging because you feel powerless is just as bad as denying what's going on. In the eyes of the planet, the only thing that matters is the actions that we take to make our planet a better place. And it doesn't matter the motivation behind it. It just matters if it gets done. And even like selfishly at Microsoft, like the way in which we're accountable as companies to our emissions doesn't just include what we emit to create our products. It also includes what our users and our customers, how they use our products. So I could make the most sustainable Xbox in the world, but it's not going to matter if everyone who uses it says, I don't care anymore. I don't care about the environment. I'm not going to turn on the low energy setting. I'm going to put it on max setting. I'm going to leave it on 24/7. And I mean, like, to give an example of that, we partnered with Fortnite, the guys who made Fortnite, Epic. and they found that people were just leaving their pause menu on at full blast for hours and hours at a time. And so thankfully we figured that out, and we said, what if we'd turn down the power needs for the pause screen, which is pretty innocuous. That alone took 14 wind turbines of power off the grid.
Whoa.
But we wouldn't
Whoa.
have that's a lot. And that's just from
Mind
like base.
blowing.
I
Okay.
know, and that from light software tweaks. But like, we had to do that because the user behavior wasn't really following what I would have, hoped to see, because people just said, I don't care. I'm just going to leave it on because what does it matter? So obviously we had a role to play as a company to kind of, try to like fix that, if you will. But that we had to do that in the first place because we needed the people who were playing it to feel like they were stewards, even in how they were playing their game, and they weren't. So now I don't blame these folks, because they're probably not thinking, oh, if I leave it on pause, that's a huge deal. But if enough people at scale are doing that, that's a lot of power all at once. And like when I was in charge of Windows sustainability, it's Windows on like over a billion computers. So those little tweaks do add up. And pragmatically, if you feel like the individual actions you can take do make a difference, that doesn't just help you in your life selfishly, very selfishly, that also helps companies because they're accountable for your emissions too.
So selfishly, and this might be a dumb question, but if I leave tabs open, does that use more energy or not necessarily?
So yeah, it does.
Because now I
But
feel guilty because I need to close my tabs.
no, but here's what's kind of fun is, and nobody uses this browser, so like I don't blame anyone for not knowing this, but if you use Microsoft's browser, Microsoft Edge, we actually have something and have for a couple of years called sleeping tabs. So it doesn't force or compel your behavior, right? It doesn't say, hey, you can't have these tabs open, I'm going to close them all. It says, hey, for the ones you're not using and haven't used for a bit, we're just going to put them to sleep. And that's a huge energy saver, and it only keeps the most important tabs active, and then it takes down the power draw of the ones that you're not using. So there are tons of things companies can do, but it's all around this interesting dance of like, how do we behave as individuals, in interacting with the products that we have purchased from these companies out in the world.
Again, so many things come to mind. For one is, and I think I say this in my book too, where who's it up to change this? Is it governments, is it companies, or is it individuals? And the answer is yes. Meaning, of course, it's everyone,
All of
right? Like
us.
we can't just be like, it's the company's fault for creating products. Like, well, we're the users of them. So there needs to be a dance, like you said. I think there's also something to be said about choice architecture, where let's make it
Yeah.
easy for people to make the right choices. Meaning, if I do leave my screen on pause because maybe I had a screaming kid, I don't think this is the case because I think players pause for different reasons, but this is my reality. I'm doing something and then suddenly there's a child who needs my attention and I just leave whatever I was doing and come back to it hours later. So maybe that's the case, right? And so if that happens for overwhelmed parents out there or other people who get interrupted, the company can create a sort of a default where like, okay, you haven't used it for 5 minutes, we're gonna put it to sleep. So,
Right.
like that's the choice architecture of like, we're making it easier for you to go about your life without using unnecessary energy or whatever that might look like. But then there is also this dance, like you said, where customers, people, we need to get excited about how do we participate. And I think that's why the work that we're doing is so important, where we have to invite people to want to partake in that, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we need to stop shaming and blaming, because our brains will go like, no, thank you, I'm good. Like, don't you tell me what to do. I don't want to feel like I need to sacrifice whatever. And it's easier to just live in denial and let someone else do the work. But if we invite people instead to say, you know what, we can do this. There are so many things that we can do. Here are the companies already doing the work. Here are amazing people around the world doing the work. And here's what you can do to contribute. And I'm inviting you now to participate. And that's when it starts to get exciting. And I think, I don't know exactly what the answer is. Your book obviously is one of them. And then we have to just have more, I think, ongoing education around, for one, we need to know the reason behind why it's important to participate. Like, what are we heading towards that we want
Yeah.
that we want to avoid? But then by participating and being part of this quote unquote journey, what is the alternative direction we want to go into, right? So I think we have to also
Yeah.
paint a picture of like, what are we trying to achieve? And the more we can sort of communicate that, like you did with your hairdresser, of like, oh yeah, like you can be independent as your own little grid, you can save money.
Yeah.
There's so many opportunities and possibilities involved in this. There's the art of possibility, right? So many things. And I think your book is truly important and amazing. And what you said too, there are different kinds of books on climate optimism. And I think they all complement each other. I think you need to have
Yeah.
a library of climate optimism books. And so don't just get one and think you're good. Like definitely get Charlie's book, especially if you read mine, because it's going to really complement what I'm talking about. But yeah, I guess that was my little spiel on more climate
Yeah.
optimism.
And I think you said something that's important to elaborate on is I think we have to strike that really interesting balance between putting the burden on the individual versus putting the opportunity on the individual. Because I think, there's a lot of history of the former. So, I talk about this in my book, a little bit of some of the history of how some of these terms came to be. The notion of a carbon footprint was coined by the oil and gas industry.
Right.
And that was, and the onus of recycling was done by, like the Coca-Colas of the world. A lot of the personal accountability elements have actually been engineered by, in many cases, the polluters. And so that is a trap I don't want the readers to come away and hear it being like, oh, okay, Charlie's saying all of the responsibility of climate change is on me. No, as you said, it's yes, all of us need to play a part. But the way that we play a part has to be kind of activating ourselves, not as thinking of it as like, how do I minimize my burden? How do I maximize the way in which I fit into this broader tapestry of other things happening? Yes, companies do need to make these sustainable choices more available, more cost effective, more present, more easy to parse and more present. But that has to be a fine dance with you actually taking advantage of the things that are put on. And then, of course, the most impactful thing with the political landscape in which we operate has to actually allow these things to take place and to engender that kind of a culture to move forward rather than the opposite. Just in case anyone's reading or listening to this and being like, oh, Charlie's telling me if I don't turn off my Xbox, then I'm the problem. I am not saying that. But I am saying that you are part of the solution, depending on how you decide to engage with these opportunities that hopefully my book will make very clear the real things that we all need to do to make a difference.
Right. And they can seem, once you start to become aware, you're like, oh, dang, I just left lights on in every room of this house. And, you start to get overwhelmed by how much you can actually, quote unquote, participate. But I think taking it bite sizes of, okay, I can become a little bit more aware in this area of my life. And then you start to just incorporate that. And sure enough, in a little small amount of time, that becomes a new habit. And it's not even going to be taking any brain power from you at all. You're just going to be like, okay, I'm stepping away, I'm going to turn it off, or I'm going to pause it in a way that it doesn't generate unnecessary energy. So there is so much opportunity both for ourselves to feel like we're contributing and being part of the solution, but also just in ways that we can, quote unquote, minimize our footprint. You talked about companies, and I want to actually dissect this question a little bit because it's a touchy one sometimes, and people have very different opinions about it. But do you believe in a future of the world we're trying to strive for, which is this regenerative, sustainable, net zero world? Do companies have a role to play? And if so, does it look like today? I mean, there are no right or wrong answers here. It's just like kind of exploring of what does the future of business look like? What roles do companies play in our world in the future? Should we rely on them? Should we count on them? Or should we cheer them on? Or should we try to move into a system where we don't have companies? There's so many different opinions, obviously, but I would love to hear yours.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because it all depends on like what makes sense for society in some regards, what makes sense for the individual. Because there's a world where what you just said is 100% true. Like, would we live in a regenerative world if there were no companies? Yeah, probably. But we also wouldn't be able to drive anywhere because there would be no cars. We wouldn't really be able to heat or power our homes. And so that trade-off, I think, is one that just wouldn't be concordant with how we personally feel like we want to experience life. So, at the extreme there, yes. At the other end, it's probably fair to say that companies alone aren't going to do everything it takes to become regenerative all by itself. And that's where, again, another place where we're powerful is the things and the signals we collectively give to companies about what we care about really kind of help push us towards this more regenerative future together. Because when you unlock a company, that puts a lot of money into the system towards sustainable solutions. And I think that's what's been really fun working at Microsoft is, we're spending tens of billions of dollars on data centers. And on the surface, while you might say, whoa, that's a lot of money, like what are you guys doing with it? On the other hand, if you're a clean energy developer, you're like, oh, I now my business has legs because I know that this company is committed to buying renewable energy alongside everything that we're doing. And so there's a huge infusion of capital. This it's called like accelerationism of like, yeah, maybe it's not great to build a whole bunch of new things, but we can use that exercise to put money in the system to give it to the green developers that then can then take that advantage, build their capability out, and give it to everybody else. Like I think what's fun in my world is we do a lot of advocacy for green building materials like green concrete, green steel, cross-laminated timber. If people aren't paying for those things, then the suppliers of those things never have a reason to come and enter the market.
Right.
But we announced our first wooden data centers a couple of months ago, and then that kind of put a lot of the industry on the cement industry on notice. Like, oh shoot, they can make them out of wood now. And then the wood, the timber, the cross-laminated timber folks are like, oh wow, there is a market for this. Maybe we should invest more of our own money into extending this further, try to sell more of it. So, it's a long-winded answer, Anne Therese, to your question is I do think companies can play this interesting role in developing these green solutions and bringing the costs down for customers. But it only depends on if we as people hold the companies accountable to those things. If we're saying, hey, we're not going to pay anything more for sustainable products, then, or we're not going to buy sustainable products, then why would a company want to build a product that no one's going to buy?
Right.
And so it's this interesting dance of how we come together. And then of course, how we vote on the rules via the political system to govern the nature of the game in which we're all trying to play is critical as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a touchy, again, conversation to have in our current political climate, and we're not going to go into that right now, but there's a lot of pushback in the wrong direction right now. And so, of course, that feels like, a little bit of an uphill battle, but also I heard this on the Outrage and Optimism podcast, which is another amazing podcast for anyone who hasn't tuned in yet. They were saying that, the whole topic was, is there still hope for climate under a Trump administration? And they were like, well, you have to just look to the private sector right now and to see that there is more money to be made in the sustainability sector than in the gas and oil industry. And so even like the gas and oil companies are recognizing that the future isn't purely in gas and oil. And so I think, maybe there is a world in the future where we have figured out a completely different system, that we're driven by completely different values. Now, as a species, I think we are driven by efficiency and wins and getting those kicks of like, how else can we, maximize ourselves and, create more and better. I think we can redefine what that more and better looks like. And I think that takes a lot of inner work to realize that maybe what we're striving for currently, which is having more stuff and bigger things, like that is ultimately not the answer to happiness. But there still needs to be some sort of drive from within to like, how can we make things more efficient? How can we make things better in a different kind of way? And I do think companies play some sort of role in that, at least until the transition takes place. Like we're in this transition right now. And I think people tend to forget that, yes, we're striving for a different kind of world, but then there is a bridge that needs to be built. And so like, how can we become bridge builders and invite people on to this journey? And how do we, participate in the shift ultimately? So an open-ended question, and I'm leaving it somewhat open-ended so that listeners can also kind of like dive in with their own thoughts and keep thinking about it. But, it's something we're thinking about. And I think you really answered it beautifully, where there's still a dance. And I think the political landscape needs to also come in and set out the rule work and the framework that allows for companies to actually make the right decisions and for consumers to buy into the right products. But yeah, there's some change coming up.
Well, so if you'll allow me to go there a little bit, Anne Therese, and I
it.
will preface this by saying, listeners, you've heard me, Charlie, as the author. I'm not speaking on behalf of my company, just in case I say something goofy here. But, one of the things, and when I wrote my book, is I was intentionally looking to make it as bipartisan of a book as possible. Alongside yourself, of course, one of the people who endorsed the book is a former Republican state representative here in Minnesota. Because there's a lot of things that you can imagine in a Republican agenda that actually do help the climate. It's just, it might be harder to see. And so I'm actually going to give the listeners a brief moment, and you're never going to hear this from any other sustainability professional, of slight optimism in some of the things the Trump administration has done. Now, I agree to Anne Therese, at large, I don't think it's going to accelerate the clean energy transition as much as the prior administration. But if you look at the energy executive order that was made, the big hit, rightfully so, that the energy or that the sustainability community saw was that wind and solar were excluded from this big push for accelerating permitting and deregulation. But you know what wasn't excluded? Hydropower, biogas, nuclear. All three of those things being low carbon or no zero carbon sources of power. On top of that, the biggest issue with clean energy now getting onto the grid is not the cost of the clean energy itself. It's the delay of the grid and the need for improved grid infrastructure to bring all of these renewables online. And that actually is in need of getting fixed and sped up. And so part of that executive order is about kind of speeding up how the grids can build out their infrastructure to bring new power online. So if you have all those things together, and if we believe that clean energy is the cheapest form of energy available, then you're actually creating a system that might accelerate more renewables onto the grid than before. And I guarantee you that the administration was not planning for that to be the effect. Who knows how it'll roll out in a couple of years here? But there are little kind of places where it's worth taking a look and understanding. There can be optimism and silver linings everywhere. And this is one that, like, I was dreading reading that executive order, Anne Therese. I was like, oh God, how bad is it going to be? I came away feeling pretty okay. I was like, I think there's some stuff in here that's going to keep things from getting really bad. It might even make some things decently good. Who knows?
You just brighten my day, and it's a very dreary, rainy day here. So that says a lot. Thank you for that. On behalf of myself and all our listeners, there's climate optimism under the Trump administration. That makes me really excited. And let's focus on momentum, right? And I think something too that keeps coming to me where, I don't know, like, I don't want to get too political in this episode, but there's something to be said about, like, when we get angry, something too gets activated. We can't become too complacent. And so even though the Biden administration did put in some pretty significant wins and, strides in the right direction, I don't think it was enough, but I think we have been so depleted of wins for so long that even the smallest wins felt good. But maybe now, because there are no wins, seemingly no wins, we get activated in a different way. And I think if we can kind of hone in on what's actually happening, let's find those little silver bullets and let's, work with those both spiritually, but also actively, like in our communities, in our companies, in our towns. Like, what can we do? And there's so many mayors around this country that are still super committed to climate action. Like, we're still heading in the right direction. I truly, truly believe that. And back to our conversation, let's find the optimism. Let's not lead into defeatism right now and say, okay, well, that was it. Let's just throw the towel away and say done with. This is a time to get activated and, like, get really excited about what can be done and what is happening and how can we tag along with those wins and make them bigger.
Oh God, yeah. And I think, the whole third part of my book. So, if my book is scheduled in three, or not scheduled, but built in three chapters, there's the personal life things, the how do you make your home and your transport more sustainable, the professional world of how do you get yourself into a climate career. In that political section, the final section of the book, entries to what you said, and I think you mentioned it nicely, there are a lot of elections happening, and it's not just the federal election. And it's in those elections that you kind of start to suss out that these more local issues tend to be the ones where people are really excited about sustainability, irrespective of what party you're from. So at the same election that elected the Trump administration, locally here in Minnesota, where I'm based, voters approved with an 80% approval rate to extend a program to use our lottery proceeds to help fund wildlife and wetland conservation and park maintenance. And that was every single county in the entire state of Minnesota voted in favor of this. There are some things that are just absolutely things that we all agree on. And especially once you get away from the noise of the federal towards the state, the local, the hyperlocal, you'd be amazed at the little kind of nuggets that's like, actually things are moving positively in the right direction. So that always gives me a lot of excitement as well, even if the engine, the media engine that exists is all about, to your point, activating people's rage, and for what it's worth. And I know you talk about this in your book, and I'll mention it briefly here as well, as like, when used appropriately, that's not a bad thing. It can't be the only thing that powers I loved how you wrote that. It can't be the only thing that powers your activism. because then if you're not angry, you think you're not being active enough.
Right.
But it was when the first Trump administration was elected that I kind of made that mental aha, saying, "Oh, if I can't rely on the federal government, how can I look at my job that I already have and have that be something that leads me to be able to do sustainability more in my professional life?" So if it weren't for that the first Trump administration in 2016, I might not have internally made that mental pivot to say, okay, I'm an events guy. Can I do something in sustainability here? Because I don't think it's going to happen federally. I
Mm.
probably, I'm gonna regret saying this, but I probably have the Trump administration to thank for me being in the climate profession altogether.
Let's say it out loud. And it led you to the question, what can I do? And you then wrote the
Yeah,
book, What Can We Do? And ultimately, that's how you turn anger into optimism, practical optimism, active optimism. It's when we activate ourselves, it translates into optimism. So, for anyone listening who's like new to this concept, if you're frustrated, angry, worried, whatever, and then you start to participate and get active, and suddenly you feel really good about yourself or excited about what's happening, you're like, wait, this is weird because I'm still kind of concerned about where we're headed. No, it's literally your body taking care of things so that you can be more inspired, be more motivated. Like the action itself will start to create these molecules in your body that makes you feel better. And so it's okay to feel good as a quote unquote climate optimist or climate activist. It's okay to feel excited about where we're headed, even though on the surface it looks like we're not heading in the right way. So read Charlie's book, obviously. I can't wait to read it myself. By the time this episode airs, it will be out in the world. So just go find it. And we're gonna have to wrap here shortly. But a question I really want to ask you, which I will ask probably most of my guests here on the show, is guided by this one quote that completely changed my life in my early 20s
yeah,
when I first read it, and it continues to guide me till this day. And it's by Mary Oliver, and it goes, "Keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable." And when I first read that, it just expanded my heart in a way that I didn't know possible. And I can look back and say, whoa, from that day on, my world, my life completely transformed over and over and over again. And I don't think I would ever be
yeah.
where I am today if it wasn't for that mindset shift. So for you, what comes to you when you hear that quote? And if you were to somewhat envision an unimaginable world, where are we 20 years from now?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Well, the first thing I'll just respond with the first thing that came to mind is the phrase "it's not too late." Is, in my mind, the unimaginable is that it's not too late, because it can feel like it's too late. It can feel like we've already crossed the 1.5 degree threshold. But there's gradations. 1.5 is a lot more habitable than 4 degrees Celsius warming. So it's not too late to make a meaningful difference and minimize the negative impacts. And I do want to acknowledge, by the way, for the readers who are saying like, oh, well, isn't climate optimism just another way of being climate ignorant and just ignoring what's going on? I think you and I would both agree that's not what we're trying to do. I think we want to fully acknowledge that, climate change is going to have effects on a lot of especially vulnerable populations in ways that are going to be really tough to see over the next years. But that's not to suggest that that needs to be the prevailing thing that completely negates our belief that there's things we can still do. And so I'd like to hope in 20 to 30 years, Anne Therese, that people have kind of realized that even though things might get bad, they're not, that isn't the death sentence. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's the choices that we make now to bend the curve that in 20, 30 years, we can really kind of see, ideally, maybe not net zero. Who knows what our governments will ultimately achieve, but really on that trend towards completely reversing this historic trend of more growth means more emissions. So I don't know. I would love to hear your answer here too, Anne Therese, but 20, 30 years from now, I don't see a world in which the clean energy transition has not succeeded. I don't see a world where sustainable products are not readily available. I don't see a world in which buildings are built without some consideration of using green building materials. I think we're still very much in day zero of sustainability, frankly, especially in the corporate world. I mean, Microsoft only made its commitments 5 years ago. So we've been on this like 5-year learning journey, and we've learned so many things that are going to take a lot of time to really mature in the market. But oh God, 20 to 30 years from now, I mean, it might even be as crazy, Anne Therese, as like everybody has their own modular small nuclear reactor, just like that big, can fit in the back of your truck, just sitting in your backyard, powers your whole neighborhood. there's the sky's the limit in the future. But I want to hear what you have to say too on this.
No, you're right on. And I think something we have to remember is that there is this exponential growth opportunity where one thing unfolds to the next. And because we can't see what the next unfolding is, we can't see the third and the fourth. And so
Yeah.
that's where the unimaginable comes in for me. Two examples. For one, I currently live in Western Massachusetts, a couple of hours north of New York City. I would never have put this location on the map for myself in my 20s, but it took me moving to New York City, meeting a guy who then happened to come from here, and now we live here with kids and are close to his family. But, like the one unfolding was going to New York City, and then, the next unfolded from there. And I think we have to remember that, like, we can't always see the entire road because the unfolding of events needs to happen in a certain order. And that's one thing to remember, like in terms of sustainability, like we don't know what's going to be the quote unquote normal because we have to first step into some other unfoldings before that can even come to us.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think you're right that like we're just in the early baby phases of what's possible here. And people are starting to wake up to like, not only is it inevitable that we move in this direction because it's not sustainable to live otherwise, but it's better for us. We can live better lives, healthier lives. We can have, greener cities that ultimately are better to breathe in and a more joyful experience. And what if we cut down our working hours and had more time to spend with our families, got less sick? Like there are all these different things that like win on win on win on win. And when we really tune into like, what are the wins to be had here? And how can we maximize those experiences? I think we'll realize that it's a more sustainable world. And so it is going to be sort of like the no-brainer answer to all the questions that we have. And something that I talk more about even just lately than I have in the past is this need to slow down to hear our own answers. Like we know ultimately what is the right way to go about this. And I think when we start to slow down, not only do we feel better and are more rested and more empowered and feel more inspired, we also recognize that there are different ways of going about life that are ultimately better. And they will inevitably also be better for the planet. And so I think, again, let's just take a breath and slow down and start existing in this moment and see what else unfolds as the year goes by.
Totally. And then I think one of the things you said across all that is like, a lot of this can be inevitable. I think it's only inevitable if we make it inevitable. I think we have to be very uncomfortable with the notion that 1 billion people being imperfect in how they save the planet is much better than 10,000 people being absolutely perfect. So this is a future that can be inevitable if we all activate ourselves to maximize our, use your phrase, maximize our footprints to make it inevitable. And that's what you and I are trying to do, is I think encourage folks to believe that this future is possible and to believe that the actions that they take while they slow down help us speed up over time to get there. At least that's the thesis. Hopefully it ends up bearing true.
Well, let's fuel energy into that. And I like to say a better world is possible if we choose to make it so. So to your point, there is optimism in the action, and it's, consciously choosing how do I want to participate. And I just want to say thank you for getting so passionate about this work, for, navigating this journey into sustainability that you didn't think you would end up in, and for writing this book. So on that note, where can people find it? Where can people find you? And how can they stay connected if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of those weird millennials that only has LinkedIn as his social media. I got rid of Facebook and Snapchat and all those things years ago. So you can find me on LinkedIn, which is not exciting at all. But more realistically, you can go to my website at www.charliesellars.com. And that'll give you access to be able to find the book, as well as a lot of other fun little things like my blog and other nuggets. And because my name is spelled Sellars, and I know people are going to misspell it, you can go to two different charliesellars.com. Even if you misspell it, it will reroute you to the right website. So don't worry on that.
And they will also be linked in the show notes, so you can just click right now and find them.
Perfect.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate you. So good to see you as always. And I hope we stay in touch because there's so much more to talk about.
So much more always is. All right, Anne Therese, thank you so much for having me on. And thank you for what you do for the climate optimism movement as well.
Thanks for listening. We want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram @climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Jackie Himmel, Bhavna Bhavani Shankar, and Adam Java. A big shout out to our new designer this season, Tyler Mayfield, and our social media strategist, Brianna Reggioni. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at The Climate Designers. You can find design prompts and more information on all of our guests this season at climateDesigners.org/edu/Climify and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers.